served in the service from 1935 through 1945 for 10 years. And this is sort of an outline of what happened. I joined the National Guard, Michigan National Guard, 32nd Infantry Division and 32nd Division, 126th Infantry Band. Played trombone in the band. My oldest brother played trumpet. The next one played clarinet, and I was the trombone. And we shared one big foot locker, and we're the magnificent PFCs, Peter, Arthur, and Robert Cook. We had a good time. Our armory, you had to know somebody to get in the Guard back then. It was after the Depression. And we had a nice armory in Grand Rapids, indoor swimming pool, tennis courts indoor, and lots of things, benefits. Plus a little few dollars every month, and that helped. We had a nice camp up at Grayling on Big Lake Marguerite. It was like we never had it so good. Plus we'd get to play little dance jobs and things and make a little money. But it was a great experience because I learned when to volunteer, when not to volunteer for, and when to be out of sight. When the National Guard was federalized, we were sent down to Camp Beauregard, just outside of Alexandria, Pineville, Louisiana. Six of us actually we were all from the same high school, drove our cars down. I had was an old 35 Ford convertible yet that had a rumble seat. We drove from Grand Rapids, hopefully to find where we could find where Pineville was. When we moved out to Livingston, we were the first ones in, and it was a mud hole. Man, we couldn't hardly get around anywhere. There were just roads in and out that were paved, and everything else was mud. It was very inconvenient for our cars. So there was a whole lot of GIs there and very little transportation. Taxi service into town was fairly expensive, and we found out we could head out to the gate where they were all standing in a pile and just say, hold our hand up. And by then I'd traded in my little Ford convertible for a big old Oldsmobile 8, it was a 38 Oldsmobile, eight cylinder it would hold 6 people, but you could put 2 on their laps. You know, with a driver, I would have 5 people and we'd charge them $1 a piece. And we could make about 4 runs before time to quit and make good money. The taxi drivers would we have to go out the back door once and then the side door and then the front door. The taxi drivers would turn us in. But we'd make enough money that we'd go into town and play tennis a while and eat at there was an all-night waffle place or something. And then get back out to camp at least in time to play reveille. And if we weren't going anywhere, we had a nice thing going. We could rent our cars out to other GIs. It was cheaper for them to rent our cars and pay us, because then they could leave right away and didn't have to wait for a bus or a train, and they'd have it for the week and bring it back. I was very fortunate to be playing in the band so that we didn't have to do a lot of the things that the infantry was doing. But we still enjoyed the Army life. We were getting acquainted with Louisiana. And then one morning, the chaplain said there's a Methodist church in Pineville, and they'd like to have some of the Methodist boys that are over for Sunday service. And he said, now, how many Methodists do we have? And there were about 3 of them, they kind of raised their hand, where they went. He said, well, now they're going to take you to dinner. How many are your Methodists now? Yeah! And I went to the O'Neill's house. I didn't meet their daughter because she was up at Louisiana Normal at the time, now known as Northwestern State University. And so I didn't meet her at the time, but her mother could cook that chicken. And so eventually, when she did come back, we had some dates and got along fine, but my enlistment was up. And I returned to Grand Rapids because my older brother was getting married. And I had 1 week, and in that week, the government froze all enlistments and draftees. Everything that should have been through in October, all these people, they were in for the duration. I was home and didn't go back. But I knew after December when the war broke out that it wouldn't be long and I'd be back in the service. I decided to go down and become a pilot, and I drove down to Kalamazoo, Michigan to enlist, volunteer as a fighter pilot, and found out I was legally colorblind and I couldn't get in the Air Force, I couldn't get in the Navy, I couldn't get in the Marines, I couldn't get in the Coast Guard, and that just left the infantry. In the meantime, my oldest brother called and said, "Bob, they're looking for electrical engineers, and you can right down to Michigan State and see if you can get in the program." So I did. I was accepted, and Michigan State sent a professor up for about 20 of us who'd been accepted. And when we passed that test, I had to re-enlist in the service, go down to Detroit, Michigan, and there enlist as a private in the enlisted reserve assigned to the Signal Corps. The nice thing about that, as a private now, I was making $120 a month civil service plus $180 per diem because we were being sent to a Signal Corps school in Chicago. We lived in the Webster Hotel. One of my roommates was the tax assessor for all of Cook County, so we had tickets to everything that we wanted to see: circuses, programs, shows, all the big shows. And we did basically solve every problem in the book known as Cook's Mathematics for Electrician Radio Men. We got through with that. We were then assigned to the Philco plant in Philadelphia. And this was secret equipment. This time, when we got through at school, before in Chicago, we spent every night working problems. In Philadelphia, when we walked out of the plant after working on the secret equipment, we couldn't even tell people what we were doing. But once again, it was this business of pressure, pressure, pressure. Here you are in the Signal Corps, and if you flunk this test, you'll be on the front lines digging telephone holes for telephone poles. So it was pressure. By now, the troops of the Army of the War had gone along to where they'd landed in Africa and that. And we were still, of course, all in civilian clothes, making a nice salary. I don't even think my dad was making that much at that time. Anyway, all of a sudden, we were to go to New York to the GE and start on radar, and all of a sudden the announcement came down, "We're going to need repairmen. We don't need engineers." And the whole group of us received orders to various places. I had to go home, and there my secret orders were opened all right by my family, so they knew where I was going. I was being assigned to a Woodward Air Force Base in Oklahoma. The only thing, after going through the induction center again and getting all the shots, I was now reduced to a private in the Signal Corps, assigned to this little base in Oklahoma. 4 of us got off the Super Chief that night about 10 o'clock, and one little restaurant with one taxi there, and we asked about the air base. I said, "Oh yeah. There's some bulldozers out there on the field clearing some ground. Are they going to build a field there?" I said, "We're assigned to it." "Oh, there ain't nobody there but workers." The truck took us into Will Rogers Field, Oklahoma City. Nobody there knew what to do with us. There were 4 privates, all 4 of us privates in the Signal Corps, but I'd been a sergeant in the National Guard, so I was in charge of the 4 of us. They said, "Well, we don't know what to do with you. We'll try and find out. But in the meantime, you're in charge, and you'll give them their basic training." I don't have any gun, no, just marching. So we'd go out on the field and sit under a tree and discuss, and then we'd do about face a few times and march back and forth. And then I'd go in, we'd sign out, and we'd all take a pass and go into Oklahoma City. After about 2 weeks of that, we got a few more fellas coming in. Then finally we found out we were members of what would be known as the 22nd Signal Company. And new people kept coming in, and finally we got 2 second lieutenants. And they said, "You're now an organization and you'll be sent out." We were sent out to Casper, Wyoming, a B-17 base. So we made friends with a couple in Casper. They had the lease on Hell's Half Acre, had a lodge in the mountains, and the 4 of us would go up and we'd ride horseback and we did this and that. We had a good basketball team. Went to Scotts Bluff for a little while to repair junky old radios they donated for the servicemen. I wish I had them today. They'd be worth a fortune in antiques. So finally we are now a fairly good organization, and they suddenly, in snow on the ground, they say we're being moved. And where we're being moved is to Tallahassee, Florida, Dale Mabry Field, where we went from temperatures in the low 30s to temperatures in the high 70s, and we walked around and passed out like. So they gave us a couple of weeks off while we got acquainted with Florida. Now, a thing happened there at the base. The base band did not have a trombone player for their dance band. I said, well, I played trombone, but so they talked to the officers, yeah, we'll give them time off and that. So I sent home and they sent my trombone down to me. While I was at Tallahassee, I played in the dance band enough to make enough money to buy a ring, so I proposed, and I had a flight. I was going to fly into New Orleans right from Tallahassee, and that plane came down, a little old twin-engine thing, came down in Mobile, and two colonels got on, and I got bumped off. And I had to catch the train across, and I had no way back then, no way of telling where they were in New Orleans. But we got together and proposed and I gave her the ring then and caught the train back. And then after I went to the Aircraft Recognition School, which is a great school, they use the flash with a timer on your slide projector of all these different planes, and you had to pass, you had to recognize what they were and make a reasonable guess at whether there was 2, 3, or 50, or 40, not only identify the plane, but how many, and you were timed. You'd start out, maybe they'd give you a half a minute to look at them, and they'd get you down. Before you finished the course, you had no more than 5 seconds to decide what it was and about how many were coming in. And to this day, I think that's when I began to like teaching, because I was just the T4, and then my first class was all the officers, the colonel on down. I don't know whether they learned anything or not, but I had a good time. I was the boss. They you know, you can't fail this course, man alive. I'm good. But then after that, I got a week off. I got a furlough, and that's when we got married. So she came back, and we had our apartment, a room rented in this lady's house. And we got off the train. The train stopped and let you off right in the field at Dale Mabry if you wanted to get off. We went in, and the couple there were still there. He thought he'd be transferred out. He's a P-47 pilot, and he hadn't been transferred out. And so we went to the USO there, and they said, well, let's call around. We do have people in town who will, take you. And man, I remember walking to the place, and it was gorgeous. I mean, it was the parents of the governor, and it was a beautiful home. And we stayed with them about a week before our house apartment came open. And all of us went to Tinker Field, but at Tinker Field they broke us up into cadres. I was there in the group that got wiped out. And at that point, we suddenly find out we were given to the Air Transport Command. The Signal Corps insignia and everything comes off, and we now are in the Air Transport Command. In retrospect, what we don't know is that the B-29 was being pushed real heavy, and all of a sudden our group, they said, look, we're going to need service groups for the B-29s, which the war is going to be short. We won't need electrical engineers. We're going to need servicemen. So all the time we don't know what we're doing, and they're just shifting us around because the B-29s aren't coming off the line. So we get to Oklahoma City, and we saw one B-29 then. And now we are get ready to go overseas, all the tests and everything, and they send us to a little air base in Pratt, Kansas, a B-17 base again. And we don't know it. I know now that they were training the B-29 people on these B-17s because there wasn't enough B-29s to go around. So after a short time there, we're ready to go overseas. Lois has to, all our wives leave and that. And I go into town, spend one last night with our friends in town at the apartment. and a tornado hits the base. Doesn't kill anyone, but it wipes out our entire headquarters system. All our records are gone, we're destroyed. So we have to do all this again. The buddies who are with me, who I would have been with, are now going over to India with the first of the 29s. The others from the other bases are going over to Saipan, and we are still being retrained because there are no records of us. But they finally say, now you're ready to go, and they take us back to Tinker Field, and there's a lot of B-29s, and I still have the orders. The orders come to our officers: tell your men to make themselves useful around the base. Help fuel the planes, sweep the aprons, clear this and that. And I said, oh boy. That's where National Guard again comes in handy. I went over there and looked around and found out that you had to, I worked for test flight. I found out that every time the factory finished a plane and turned it over, he'd come to you with a price tag on it. A crew had to fly it for at least an hour or two and check it out. So I said, hey, yeah, we always need observers, somebody to sit in and watch and that. And I said, man, I'll sign up for that. So now I'm in the waiting room all the time. I'm not outside. There's ping pong tables there. They call your time of the flight and we go out. Never had a bad one, fortunately. But it was, we flew all over Texas. We'd fly down to Oklahoma, all around. And I just had a good time flying, and a little trouble once in a while. Never had to bail out. But it got me out of all this other picking up stuff and that the others had to do, because now I was assigned to the flight crew with a bonus. A B-17 came in from Europe. I don't remember the pilot's name, but he was from Lake Charles. And he was going to fly down to Lake Charles. And I said, hey, can I go along with you? He said, yeah, tell your CO you want a 3-day pass. Well, when I mentioned his name and 3-day pass, no problem. So I was one of the only one of our whole group that got a 3-day pass just before we went overseas. A troop ship is quite an experience. It's packed jam, it stinks, half the fellows are seasick. And again, I don't know what happened, but I was called up on deck, and the major there, chaplain, said, yeah, I got your trombone. I said, why? He said, I got another one fella that's got a trumpet, and he said, you're my music. I don't have any piano or anything else there. You're my music. We said, well, God, we'll have to, you can come up on deck. We'll give you a pass to come up on deck anytime you can practice. So we got out of that hole down there and could watch the sea. It was after that, it wasn't a bad trip. We stopped at Kwajalein, and they called me into the office and said, Sergeant, how would you like to fly on in? I said, well, yeah, where? Well, we can't tell you, but they need help. We thought you'd like to go since you know so much about the B-29s already. I said, well, okay. So myself and the corporal went over, and now I can see when these troops landed. When you go down over that ladder, that ship pitching, and there's a little LST down there, and you got to get from it into that without falling in between it or breaking a leg. But we made it good, and a B-24 took us into Tinian. And for 3 weeks, we were up there on the hill of Tinian installing the communication center for the Air Force coming in, 20th Air Force, watching the Seabees build North Field, and that in itself was a show. We didn't really have any air raids. They were trying to bomb Saipan because it was operational, but they'd fly over Tinian and avoid the radar and then bomb. And every now and then we could see they'd started fires and there'd be explosions over there, but we never had an air raid until North Field was in operation. Our unit was there, our shop was all set up, and I'm still up on the hill there attached to the headquarters of the 20th Air Force. And I'm in charge of the shop, which I've never seen. And so when I'm assigned back to my unit, here's a completely ready-to-go shop, all the equipment, everything in place. And honest to God, this is the first time since I left school that I ever touched another piece of radio equipment on an airplane. And this whole time, never were we ever allowed into any of these fields or anything, their shops. And we were to set up a communication center There wasn't anything there, just a scrubby field with a few tents. And all of a sudden, the fellow who was an illustrator for Walt Disney, he was in charge, he came, he said, we're going to have a little party tonight for the CBs. And I don't know where he got the beer and stuff, and we had a big party. And the next morning they came out and we had a concrete slab. About a week later, we had another party and we had a Quonset hut. The third party we gave to the Signal Corps, and they came out and dug the hole for telephone poles, strung all our antenna wires, gave us the lead-ins to the center, and all we had to do was plug in and check out the equipment. But that's the way it worked. You got things done. I can remember watching these CBs build North Field, loading up just a steady stream of great big dump trucks. They'd run each other off the road to see who could make the most run. If one of the trucks quit or something, they just jumped it off, pushed the side, and got another one. Kept going 24 hours, day and night. The whole place was lit up by great big spotlights. It was the largest airfield in the world when it was finished, and had more planes, more flights and everything else out of it. It was quite a place. Then, after not too long, they invaded Iwo, and that was to be a stop-off for B-29, so they called me in again and said, we're going to send you down to Guam, and they gave me and the sergeant going with me. By then I was a staff sergeant, and said, look, we're going to send you down to Guam, and you'll have all our call numbers for our planes, so that when we start using the airfield there, they'll be ready in about a week. That was the idea. The Marines would have Iwo Jima in about a week, and then we'd have the air base there. Well, it was a sickening sight sitting on that hill on Guam, watching those hospital ships come back from Iwo Jima. My God, do we have to go into that thing. But after 2 weeks, they said, well, they still haven't taken the field and that, and I don't know when they will, so they sent us back to our outfit. Well, when they got back, the chaplain had everybody that could play a horn. I don't know how he got us all together, but we had a 14-piece dance band. Again, all the downtime that the other GIs would have, we set up, we'd play about an hour to 45 minutes ahead of the movie for the GIs outdoors. And then we'd go to one of the NCO or officers club and play a dance, probably till midnight. And then if some bomb group was coming back on a mission later that night, they'd say, come on down and jam for the boys when they come back. And we'd do that, and they'd have steak and bourbon for us along with the rest of the crews. So in all, it was a pretty good time. There were a lot of things happen, storms, plane crashes. That's a long story. Everywhere there's been pictures of the planes from our 313th Bomb Wing that were shot up and still made it back. And occasionally, planes, since we had a big field, planes that couldn't get in if there were wrecks on either Saipan or Guam and get jammed up, we'd have to take them on Tinian because we had the big field. And we always had coffee and stuff in our radio shop, and they'd pull up one of these B-29s that couldn't make it all the way to Guam. And we'd have them in for coffee, but to go out and fix the radio when there'd be blood all over the radio compartment, and that wasn't, I knew it wasn't for me. I never felt that I was a real service personnel compared to the infantry and the Marines and that. What you forget in an air raid, when those planes are coming over, there were Marines. Tinian was a long, flat section where Northfield with cliffs on both edges. And actually, the Navy used it a lot of time to let their pilots train for carrier landings, just hitting the edge of that runway. But those things, when you have an air raid, they're firing everything up in the air. And not having had physics too much at that time, you forget that what goes up must come down because it don't go too high. And great big chunks of metal came down. We had holes in the top of the shop and that. And the next time we had an air raid, we went to the air raid shelter. We learned our lesson, and it is frightening when I don't know how far away the bombs were, but the dirt shakes, the ground shakes, and everything else, and you wait it out. But that was the, then on the other hand, there are accidents like one of the 29s pulled up in front of the shop, and somebody forgot to set the guns off, and somebody hit the button and put a whole round of .50 calibers through the top of the shop. Odd incidents. There was one hot dog pilot, he was a Navy pilot, and he thought he could do everything with that P-47. And he took it up over the field and stunned it, and whatever he was doing, I guess, lost consciousness, and he dove that thing straight down, full blast, right into that runway. That's when I realized why you couldn't dig much of a foxhole on that coral. I don't think you put a foot dent in that coral when he hit that runway. And there were always accidents. The 313th Bomb Wing, part of their job toward the end of the war was to mine the Sea of Japan. And these mines were such they could carry one. They were huge things. And they take off, and if they didn't take off, one of them I remember, I have a picture of, it looks like a little atomic mushroom at the end of the runway. He knew he couldn't make it. He tried to stop and went over the edge, dropped down, and that whole thing exploded. It wiped out the Marine anti-aircraft batteries at the foot of the runway. But they kept on taking off. And they crash land every so now and then. And if you wanted to, while the Marines were still around, you could always go with them if you wanted the souvenir hunt, because there were still Japanese on it when the war was over. But we worked as work was needed. We didn't have parades, we didn't have other stuff in that. When ships came in with damaged equipment, whatever time they came in, you worked on them. You didn't, we always had one or two fellows sleep in the shop, but as far as that, other than that, we worked and slept on our own time schedule. But you didn't mind working at night, because during the day sometimes you couldn't touch any of that metal if you had to go out to a plane. It'd be so hot. I think looking over these pictures, half the time I'm either in shorts or just long pants and moccasins. It was really nice. It wasn't that hot. It wasn't tropical on Tinian. If we wanted a coconut or anything, we had to go down to Guam or over to Saipan. It was more like, I guess, Kansas or something, wheat fields. No snakes, no mosquitoes. A very unusual thing. We actually wound up with nice accommodations. And you did a lot of midnight requisitions. The thing to do was to keep them flying. If a plane came in and his radio was malfunctioning, he was from Guam, and he had to, when he was gassed up and Guam was clear, he could go back. Yeah, we'd pull his set out and put a good one in and put a red tag on it and, swap it out, that's all. The idea was to keep them going all the time. I was in charge of the shop, so I had the big repair truck that could go anywhere. We'd go out and visit with the crews that worked on the planes. But you tried to work at night, that was the best. In the shop, it wasn't bad. Tinian was nice. Compared to either Guam or Saipan, it was totally non-tropic. So it was just amazing that we didn't have mosquito bars or anything. We didn't need them. There were no snakes, no cockroaches or centipedes or any bugs of any kind on it. It was really fascinating to know that it was such a tame place. We'd drive down this street to the beach and go swimming and we'd get little shells off there, and the dentist there, we'd get a chain from them, and they'd take the dental glue and make us necklaces to send back to the wife and that. One time we laughed with one Italian fella, and we got all the ingredients, and we had the big army kettle there in the shop, and we were going to make a big thing of spaghetti and meatballs. And we got all the stuff, the water in it and everything, and we didn't have anything to stir it. He said, well, shoot, take the old push broom over there and cut the broom end off of it and whittle it, shave it clean. And we did that and handed it to him, and he took that clean end and dropped that dirty handle in there and went to stir it. It killed everything, I'm sure. But those are just small things that from one day to the next, you sit down. Oh, one thing, God, they sent it with some general's great big set thing. Wouldn't play. I don't know how many people he'd taken it all around. It was our turn next. We had no diagram on the thing. We didn't know, had nothing to, and we kept it for about a month, and then we passed it on to the next shop. It didn't. But most of them, we could fix their sets, and they were very appreciative. So we had a good relationship with the medics. In our band, the fellow who was one of the medics there always had the ambulance, which was fine because we could carry the string bass and the drums and everything, and we could always, one Jeep and one ambulance, and we could make any dance job. I still say all this is looking back, and when I look at those letters, and when you look at I've got them pretty well by dates. I'm just writing mostly mundane things to Lois, and in the meantime, of course, Barbara Jean is born. I didn't know that until I got on Tinian because I wasn't with the ship and the mail didn't catch up with me till then. I'm just writing to them about day-to-day things. I wrote another letter and did this or something. I didn't get time. I'd fly. Occasionally I'd get to catch a plane over to Saipan and visit with two of my buddies that we were part of the Brain Trust. Bush and Geppert were over on Tinian. And they got socked with some pretty heavy air raids. They could tell me some stories about it, and there were medals awarded to some of them for saving plane personnel and so forth. And in one of them, just to have something to do, it was the thing to do before our raid was starting out. We walked over to where they're loading the bombs. Nobody cared about bombs. You could check them out of the way or something. They were, nobody rode around when they were pulling. I always fellas sitting on them catching a ride and that. And we'd always write messages to Tojo from Barbara Jean or something, or something to keep us busy. I don't know whether I don't think he read any of them. And I finally got my orders. We were going home. And we were going home on a coastwise tug, 170 foot. That was to be anchored off the coast of Japan with a shop in it because they didn't think by then they'd ever get enough space covered for all the shops and a big airfield that we'd probably have to operate out of. And I thought, well, all these kamikazes around, wouldn't you stand a chance in one of those little things? But we were going home in it. Everyone, officers and men, we were all from the Air Force. One merchant seaman knew something about the little ship. We took turns steering it. The cooks would cook us a big meal at noon. The rest of the time we were free to make our own meals. It took us 2 weeks to go from Tinian into Honolulu Harbor, which by then we couldn't steer straight enough to go in the harbor. They had to send a crew out to take us in and dock the thing. 3 ships left Tinian at the same time. I remember waking up sometime on the way and we were still in the water, pitching around, and that the engine, the diesels had quit. And it was about a day and a half, but that merchant seaman got it fixed and we went on the way. The radio quit one time. Fortunately, it was just one bad tube. I could fix it in a hurry. But we had movies. We played Hearts by the hour. It took us 2 weeks to get into. By the time we got into Honolulu Harbor, they were flying GIs back then with as little as 50 points, and we had something like 148. Oh man, let's get off this thing. No, that's your transportation. You got to stay on it. So after a week in Hawaii, we got back on and took out for Los Angeles. And again, same routine. Right outside, about, I don't know how many miles outside of Los Angeles, we ran into a storm. And the Inconomar went past the point where we should have rolled over. But it righted itself. Water washed clean over the deck and everything else. But we made it in and got back into Los Angeles. A big band playing and everything else. No, there was a troop ship docking over there. We just docked down a ways and somebody came by in a bus and picked us up. We got no welcome at all. And so from there it was a matter of catching the train across, because I enlisted in Michigan and I wanted to go back to Louisiana, which I didn't know all. They said, okay, then we'll owe you so much money to get you from Louisiana up to Michigan back to your home. So they gave me a check for a trip I wasn't going to make anyway, but that didn't matter. And so I was discharged then at Camp Shelby, and like the rest of the GIs, I have memories of it. Fortunately, they are not nightmares or anything that, I got a college education out of it. Took several years out of my life, but I think I came out a winner.